Speakers, publishers, consultants, coaches, and info marketers unite. The Speaking of Wealth Show is your roadmap to success and significance. Learn the latest tools, technologies, and tactics to get more bookings, sell more products, and attract more clients. If you're looking to increase your direct response sales, create a big-time personal brand, and become the go-to guru, the Speaking of Wealth Show is for you. Here's your host, Jason Hartman.
It's my pleasure to welcome Jonathan Slane to the show. He coaches high-growth leadership teams across the United States to implement the Entrepreneurial Operating System, otherwise known as EOS, and there's a well-known book entitled Traction, which I have read and I'm a fan of. He is also the founder, I believe, of a website with a great name, Recession.com. How do you like that? He's author of Rock the Recession, How Successful Leaders Prepare for and Thrive During and Create Wealth During and After Downturns. I think I messed up that subtitle a little bit, but you get the idea. Jonathan, welcome. How you doing?
Let's rock. Thanks for having me, Jason.
Sounds good. So people are out there saying, will there be a recession? And I say to them, there will definitely be a recession. One is always coming. The only question is when, how deep, what will it start with, what type, what flavor of recession will it be? But it's definitely coming, folks. Okay, let's put that idea to bed. There's definitely a recession on the way. Exactly when, we don't know. But how can we prepare for a recession, not just in terms of battening down the hatches and, being defensive, but as a famous football coach once said, the best defense is a good offense. How can we grow during a recession?
The first thing is that I don't think we're just talking about economic recessions. So if you're an investor and your largest investment goes sideways, then you're in a recession regardless of what's going on in the economy. Mm-hmm. If you're doing a deal and you find out that one of your partners embezzled $50,000 from you or $1 million from you, that's going to put you and your investment in a recession. And so a lot of these things, or if there's a regulatory change, like has happened in many states recently, you could be in a recession agnostic of anything going on in the greater economy. And so
I gotta ask you about that one. Are you referring to my former home state, the Socialist Republic of California, and their crazy? I mean, is California trying to commit suicide, or it's like nuts what they're doing? I mean, so people have always said that, but I'm referring specifically to rent control and the new killing of the gig economy through AB5 regulation. That is nuts. It's like just chase people out, I mean, what were you talking about? Not California, I guess.
Well, no, I was talking about California. It was a different regulation that recently passed the legislature outlawing single-use plastics. And so for one of my clients that's in that business, all of a sudden their entire business model will have to change. The whole point of Rock the Recession, though, is how could you take advantage of some of these regulatory changes? If you were the one company that was really thinking about what you could do if that rule was ever to pass, if you could somehow leverage all the chaos that's created in order for that to be a big break for you, that's what the book is really about. I know that the common thing, Jason, is that for recessions, what you should do is you should cut overhead and you should cut expenses and you should fire people and just try to survive.
Right.
That book had already been written. My interest is a lot more in what would we need to do now as investors or business owners or entrepreneurs to be able to thrive in a recession, since those opportunities only come around once every 7 years. And in fact, we haven't had one in a little bit over a decade now. I think we're getting right.
I miss it. I love me a good recession. There's a lot of opportunity in recessions. And, as a little aside, and I've said this often, and I think you'll be interested in this idea, is that I think a booming economy is really bad for human character. Everybody stops appreciating their customers. They just stop being grateful. It's all too easy. And all these sleazy people come out of the woodwork and, it's just, a recession is a cleansing. in a way, right? It cleans out the bad apples to some extent.
It's like the forest fire for the economy.
Yeah, a forest fire is good. You need them every once in a while because they create a lot of new like mineral deposits and it just cleans things up. Yeah.
And I think what I'm seeing is a lot of complacency. Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing a lot of our audience may have started their business, may have started investing within the last decade. That means they've never actually even been through a recession. Yeah. And so for us, it's like, what could we do now if we've never had that experience to get ready so that we could be looking forward to it so that we could pounce when it actually gets here?
Right. And, you are so right. I remember years ago when I was in the traditional real estate business, I was always pretty willing to spend money to grow. I've never been too terribly conservative or cheap about that. And when you spend into a recession, that's when you really can increase your market share because there's this vacuum where your competitors are just sitting on the sidelines, doing everything you said, cutting expenses, letting people go, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's powerful.
On that point, though, Jason, what I wanted to say is that one of the stories I had the chance to interview Christy Hefner in the book, and she was
I met her.
Yeah. Yep. So Hugh's daughter, and what she was telling me is that you're exactly right. When it comes to spending in a recession, that's what Playboy was thinking about in the Great Recession, was that for every dollar they could spend on marketing, mm-hmm. they knew they would get a bigger ROI. And I know that that's the podcast that we're on because people paradoxically spend less in recessions on marketing. They start to cut back there, even though everybody cuts back. And so if you do have the guts, the intestinal fortitude to spend more on marketing in a recession, you'll get a much bigger ROI. Those dollars go further, there's less competition, and so you can build market share. The whole point of what we're talking about is that you need to commit to that now in the cool, rational light of day, rather than the emotional heat of night when we're actually in the recession, because it's very hard to follow through on spending into a recession once we're actually in it.
Right.
That's why I want the audience to really commit to that now, put it down on paper so that you're just following through when we're in the recession so that you don't have to create the plan and then execute it.
I think that's a good way to look at it. I want to remind our real estate people too. Yeah, I know there's a lot of people doing good stuff with Airbnb properties right now, but Airbnb has never been through a recession. Every year of that company's existence has been an upswing in the economy. So just a word of caution. Okay, what can we do? Let's get down to some brass tacks here. What do we need to do? So decide now you're going to spend into it, right? You have a quiz on your website that's interesting. What are some of the questions we need to ask ourselves?
The first thing would be, do you have a written plan for the recession? That's one question. Another one is, do you have enough debt available to you to be able to buy lots of good stuff in a recession? And that debt could be a line of credit that you have as a home equity line. It could be a business line of credit. It could be a signature line. I don't care what the source is, but in a recession, you want to have a war chest available to you so that you can be a buyer when everyone else is trying to sell. Jason, I think on that one, the reason that I bring it up is because I'm getting tired of every business book of all the advice being that you need to hustle and grind, and that's the only way to really get ahead. Really, there's an opportunity that if you can just have a war chest of money, and if you're in a good buying environment, then investing in real estate all of a sudden gets a lot easier if you have access to capital. But without it, then you're not going to be able to make any moves. And so that's one of the questions. Also, I don't know, any of your audience have personal guarantees?
I don't know. It depends.
One of the questions is, have you discussed with your bank releasing personal guarantees, putting a cap on them, or extinguishing them altogether? Right now, you can actually have that conversation with your bank,
right?
Because banks are hungry for your business right now. But when we're in a recession, when you see that being announced on CNN or Fox, if you go to your bank and ask them to limit or cap your personal guarantees, they're just going to laugh at you. And so, again, that would be one of the things I'd be looking at is what are the opportunities to limit your personal exposure. And then from there, looking at things like, how can you make your business or your life leaner now so that you have more resources available to you? Mm-hmm. So per our earlier conversation, I think a lot of us have become complacent Maybe we have bigger cars than we need, more expensive cars. Maybe we have several country club memberships that we don't need. If you could take 10% of your overhead or 10% of your personal expenses and use this as a wake-up call to trim that fat and to start putting that extra 10% into savings, then by the time that we're actually in a recession, you should have a nice pot of money to be able to go out there and buy and really get great deals.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. What about, I think you've addressed it to some extent, but maybe any other words on the psychology of dealing with oneself? It's amazing to me how, the day after Lehman Brothers collapsed, for example, over 10 years ago, that was sort of the landmark where everybody thought that's when the Great Recession really began. And interestingly, nothing really changed in terms of real assets in the world. You woke up the next morning after the terrible news and, thinking, oh, the whole world's falling apart. There was the same amount of oil, the same amount of gold, the same amount of real estate. It was all still there. There were no nuclear wars. Nothing got destroyed. It's like we're in this super symbolic economy, and real assets didn't really change. They didn't evaporate, It's just kind of interesting to look at things that way. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, we're human. So again, I always prefer that we make decisions when we're rational, when we're thinking in a logical way, instead of when we're emotional. So from personal experience, part of my issue in the Great Recession was that I borrowed money from my mother-in-law in order to survive the Great Recession, in part because I didn't have a plan going into it. And without a plan, I borrowed $250,000. The worst part is it wasn't all at once, Jason. It was every 2 weeks when I needed to make payroll.
Right.
And so that was over 12 phone calls groveling for money. And that was because I was in the thick of it without a plan. If the audience is listening and can somehow get ahead of that and commit on paper to what the maximum amount is that they would be willing to borrow or to what they're going to do in terms of investing more in a recession, then they can look back on that and have that bedrock figured out now. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have it, it's going to feel like you're trying to change the wheel on a car going down the highway at 70 miles an hour.
Right.
A lot more difficult than when it's standing still. The other thing is that we looked at academic research when we were putting together the book to help validate the stories that we got from business owners. So we got stories from business owners that used the last recession to invest and make amazing amounts of money and to try to capture all of that. But on top of that, to answer your question, we're looking at the research, and that shows that humans are fickle. So we even will change our confidence in the economy, our confidence based on how many pessimistic ruminations there are in popular songs. That's just a fancy way of saying that when popular songs are negative, we tend to get more negative as a country. They can put us into a dark mood, and that causes people to spend less. And when people cut back on spending, that puts us into a recession. In other words, if we go back and look at things like the song Puff the Magic Dragon mm-hmm. and the other contemporary songs of the time, those pessimistic songs happen on a predictable basis right before the economy starts to go into recession. And these are academics studying it, not me coming back later and saying, I think because of that song, we went into recession.
Yeah, that's really quite interesting. I would agree with you. One of the Rothschilds years ago, sort of considered to be the founders of the central banking system around the world, said, let me control the money supply, and I care not who not makes the laws. I would argue, let me control the music, and I care not who makes the laws or even controls the money supply, because the music's pretty powerful. Obviously, it's led to many revolutions.
It puts us into a mood.
Yeah, sure.
And I think in the U.S., we definitely have a mood. So I'm always trying to think about what is our mood right now as a country and where are we going? I do think that in later 2020, with the big election coming up, that I don't know if we're going to have a full-blown recession. I do think that we'll have an event of some kind. In other words, I think that with the uncertainty surrounding the election, that we'll probably see a cutback in consumer spending. We'll probably see a cutback in what businesses are willing to invest. And when those two things cut back, it tends to lead us to a downturn and maybe even a full-blown recession. Mm-hmm. I do think, though, that if people are listening to us soon enough, that there is still time to be able to start saving up that war chest, making sure that you have your line of credit in place, making sure that you have access to capital so that you can go on a spending spree when we do get into the next downturn.
I want to make sure people understand that, because you and I agree on this, and your advice and my advice is counterintuitive to many, but our advice is better, frankly, and that is borrow before the recession. Have the money out of your properties in advance, because during a recession, refinancing them will be difficult. So get control of that equity now before you need it. There's that old saying, the banker never loans money to you when you actually need it. They only loan it when you don't really need it. And so I think that's a really, really interesting point. Who are your customers and clients? I mean, obviously, people read your book and so forth. Tell us what you really do. Like, what's the business in the back end?
So I'm a strategic planning consultant. I work with leadership teams of companies that are looking to double their revenue and or their profit over the next 3 to 5 years. So generally high growth companies that are looking for opportunities like a recession to be able to get tremendous growth. That's typically who I'm working with. And those companies are all over the United States, and just started with my first Mexican client. But looking at those, it's not the typical strategic planning. It's more looking at, if we've already done the things to start to get our business in order, to start to have a repeatable business, now how can we take it to the next level? How can we really break through? And what does that look like? So it's the more creative ways for us to grow a business from 5 to 10 million, or 10 to 25, or 25 to 100. What do those situations tend to look like? And how can we make that happen?
Can you share a couple anecdotes of those ideas with us?
A lot of the times it may be that you're doing something that's really weird. So for a construction company, what does it look like if you invest heavily in your IT department? So for most contractors, it's just about building something. But if you can go from building a building to providing a service, like helping the buildings that you build be more energy efficient, then you've really created intellectual property that adds a lot of value for the people that you're building the building for. And so it becomes less of a transaction and more of an intellectual property service. And so for all of the audience out there, how can you take whatever you're doing and make it less of a commodity? You want to get out of being the same as all your competitors, but a little bit cheaper or a little bit more valuable, to making it so that your competition is just irrelevant. Like, what do you need to do to your business to make the competition irrelevant? Because you're the only place on the planet that they can get what you have. And so for me personally, there's a lot of people that do strategic planning consulting. There's not a lot that do strategic planning consulting through the lens of how can we use the recession as an opportunity for massive growth. And so if you're piqued by that idea and interested, there's only a few places on the planet to get it. And right now we're talking to one of them.
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. Many have heard those stories about how some of the great ideas, industries, and companies got their start during bad economic times. The movie industry, for example, really got its foothold during the Great Recession, or Great Depression, in the 30s. What do you say about that?
Again, we want to look for disruption because that'll provide opportunity for the entrepreneurs that are savvy enough to find it. So for me, one of the things I'm thinking through for like Airbnb, what happens if that does go sideways? What can you be doing as an investor now to hedge if that were to go sideways? If Airbnb were to crash, what would you pivot to? Or what parts of the market would still be stable for Airbnb? Again, if they have a regulatory change by the government, or if Airbnb's board makes a change, then what can the audience do to capitalize? And then it's starting to think about creative, like what really happens in a recession. So we know that if you're investing in things like jewelry stores, you're probably not going to have a great ride in the recession, right? Because people are obviously going to cut back on discretionary spending, like buying diamonds. Yeah. However, things like veterinary clinics those actually did fine in the Great Recession, because what we learned is people don't care if there's a downturn in the economy. They're going to spend whatever they have to keep their pet healthy. And so they'll put that on a credit card. So again, as an investor, what could you do in terms of being creative and thinking about the fact that if you're positioned with veterinary clinics, which I don't think there's a lot of competition for right now, but it will provide a lot of stability. And I think that there's a lot of simple research that can be done online through networking to find those opportunities. Again, we know that tortillas are growing in popularity right now in the U.S. That trend, I bring it up only because I know it's a weird one.
Yeah, that's funny.
But tortillas are cheap. People love burritos. In a recession, burritos are cheap. They're going to probably eat more of them. And so if you can somehow invest in tortilla manufacturing, I think that's only going to get better.
This is so funny. It's so specific.
I know it's so specific, but Jason, I just read a research report about it because I'm always looking for these ideas that are so specific that I'm hopefully one of the only couple people, and now I've just shared it with the entire audience. So I got to look for something else.
Okay, folks, you heard it here first. Tortillas, that's the next big thing, tortillas. All right. Or as some would say, tortillas. Oh, that's great. I love it.
We've been far afield today. We've talked about Puff the Magic Dragon. We've talked about tortillas.
We have.
But yeah, I just want the audience to be creative.
I
because
agree.
I think that's at the fringes of creativity. That's where the big opportunities will be. And I'm tired of thinking that the only way to get ahead is by you have to work 40 hours at your day job. Then you have to do real estate as your side hustle for 40 hours. And then you have to drive an Uber for 30 hours. And then whatever time's left over, you can sleep.
Yeah, right.
If the audience can just slow down and really think about some creative, interesting places, then I think there's going to be massive opportunity when we do finally hit the downturn.
Yeah. Good stuff. I really applaud you for thinking about how to, as the title of your book says, rock the recession, and thinking of this differently and borrowing now while the borrowing is good. Now, we don't mean crappy consumer loans. We mean investment grade debt on your properties. Stack that up, have it ready, and you can dollar cost average into the recession that is coming. We don't know exactly when it'll come. I would caution anybody on trying to really time the market. That's very hard to do. If you were doing that, you would have said 2017 was the recessionary year, and obviously that didn't happen. So be careful of that, but do be ready. You'll know when you're in it, okay? You'll know when you're in it, but trying to time it is a rather difficult thing. The website is recession.com. The book is available in all the usual places. Rock the Recession. Jonathan, any final words to wrap it up for us?
It's really for the audience just understanding that I know that when times are so good, consumer confidence is at record highs, unemployment's at record lows. I know that nobody wants to think about the next downturn. Again, it's not about preparing so that you can survive it. It's about if you're one of the few that can spend some time now getting ready for it, then you'll be able to crush the next crash. You'll be able to dominate the downturn. You'll be able to rock the recession. But now is the time when you have to get ahead of it, because once they're announcing it on the national news, everybody's going to rush into the market with cash to start making deals, and then you'll be too late. So again, it's spend some time now getting ready, and you can be a hero when we do hit the next recession.
Jonathan, thanks for joining us.
All right, rock on. Thanks for having me, Jason.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.